A special thank you to the Archie Bray Foundation for sponsoring this episode of For Flux Sake. The Bray Clay business is your best source for Braypoxy, a two-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Braypoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, and we also have a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order online anytime at archiebrayclay.com.
Hello, my name is Kathy King, and welcome to the For Flux Sake Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Harvard Ceramics program in our fair city, Allston, Massachusetts. I'm here with Rose and Matt Katz of the world-famous Ceramic Materials Workshop, and they are ready to answer your burning questions about clay and glaze. Hey, Matt and Rose.
Hey, Kathy.
Hello, Kathy.
Love is in the air today because I'm with my two favorite Valentines of clay, at least.
Since your significant other's not here.
Exactly.
Well, my significant other is here. Hello, darling. I'm still Twitter pated after all these years.
Aww.
I'm sure those dozens of roses are going to arrive at the door any minute now, Rose.
There
no.
are rules against roses.
No.
Really? Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
I'm not a fan of flowers. I mean, I like flowers, but just
She
not
loves flowers.
Right. In the yard.
Like,
yeah.
She doesn't want to see the murdered.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that makes sense.
Well, I just find it like sad and depressing when they slowly die in the vase. Like, oh,
You have to throw away your love.
Yeah.
Someday it ends up in the compost.
So we usually don't do cut flowers here. So it's a rare occasion when we do.
You know,
Gotcha.
Chocolate is the gift that never goes away because it just sticks with your body in place.
Oh, well, it goes away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Chocolate's just a food group in our house. So, you know.
All right. Well, then I'm sure that's arriving any minute now.
It should be.
Yeah.
All right.
Totally.
See
As he
him on the
quickly
computer.
starts to
Exactly.
order something.
Google. Instacart.
Does Grubhub, deliver chocolate?
Oh, they
hearts, you
should.
think? Oh, I'm
They
All I'm
sure.
saying is, where's my chocolate? This is a two-way street.
That is
Equality
true.
real.
That is true. To be fair.
Aw, it's called clean laundry.
Wow. Ozzy and Harriet. Okay.
That's everybody has those dreams of the ceramic couples and the things you do together when you live in clay. And the answer is you wash each other's dirty studio clothes.
That's true. That's true. Endless. Well, anyway, to catch up, I was wondering about a conversation we had touched upon offline, but Matt, you were talking about something with commercial glaze labels and kind of deciphering what they mean.
Yeah. We had some students ask about this in one of our live workshops, and they were asking about all those symbols and all of those things that you'll see on a commercial glaze label. And I had to say to them, I was like, I don't really use commercial glazes. You do, Kathy. So, I think that some of these are relevant questions to what they mean, because I think we all just buy a glaze and go, oh yeah, okay, it's fine. But you never really look at the label. You never read what they say. So we did a little bit of research to find out some things. And some of them are very interesting. Now, I'm going to jump to the end here because the actual question that was brought up by this student is that what does the term non-toxic mean on a commercial glaze? And, that I think most people's assumption means is that there is no toxicity in when you use that glaze, when you put it on pots, it will not be toxic. Funny story, it's got nothing to do with that at all. When the label on the glaze says non-toxic, what it means is very simply that you can consume the raw glaze and not get sick.
Like drink it like a
chug
smoothie?
it. Yeah.
Like you could open the jar and just drink it?
Listen, that kind of links to, and I don't know if this is true, friends from California, please write in. But when I was doing a workshop in California, we talked about like the glaze containers that they had, and they're not allowed to have any like yogurt containers, nothing recycled or printed on because, and they told me the source of this was that in a nursing home, they were in their art class were drinking the glaze out of the cups. And that's where that comes from. Why
thought it was yogurt or Ensure
or whatever they were using. Yeah.
You know, we were having a conversation not too long ago with a family member who is, we'll just say, has an anti-government lean. And they were sort of griping about, government regulations, and they're all so evil. And we said to him, you know, all those rules exist because somebody did that thing. Like that's why it's not arbitrary that these rules get written. These things happen. They might not happen to you, but you need to think about, like, absolutely a senior center member. That is someone who's not, we're just going to paint some pottery or whatever, but they need to know. But yeah, you always have to be aware. So it's not a bad rule to not use a food container like that. I don't know. Everybody uses the, whatever that one gelato container, it's
Talenti.
Yeah. I mean, it is a nice container. It's grooved down
I know.
and everything.
Yeah. But as far as the commercial glazes, so that's the first one. Non-toxic on a label means that it confirms to the ASTM C1023, which is about the oral consumption of materials. And that's an art standard material. It's not just for glazes, but that is what it is talking about. It means that it will not affect you from consuming the material raw, but saying non-toxic on a glaze container means nothing about the fired glaze. Now, the fired glaze often has to do with the international food safe label, which is often the fork and cup or the fork and the spoon symbol. If you see that means that the glaze is certified by the manufacturer for food use. And so if you look at a commercial glaze label, you'll often see if there's a knife and a fork or a knife and a cup on there, that those do mean that you can use that for food under their definition and that it has been defined. So that's different. Non-toxic and okay for food are very, very different things. The other two that absolutely. The other two that you'll often see is you'll often see a label that's like a circle and it has the letters AP in them. And that means approved product. And what that states is that the liquid glaze does not contain sufficient quantities of chemicals that would cause acute or chronic health problems to humans, including children, which is really important, as determined by a medical expert. So that one says that there's nothing very, very toxic in that glaze. The other one, though, is the CL label. Again, this is sometimes is inside a hexagon shape, and it just has a big CL, and there's a bunch of small text around it. But CL is cautionary labeling, and that says this product is not suitable for children under 12.
Interesting.
Okay.
So watch those labels. They're not there for no reason, and they all mean something. Non-toxic is not what it means. That's you have to watch the CL and the AP, especially. I know we have a lot of educators, a lot of elementary educators here. Watch out. That CL label you probably should not be using in your classroom if it's got a CL, and don't assume that non-toxic means what you think it means.
We're going to post this on our blog.
Yeah, we'll post it.
So you'll see imagery and explanations on it. So, but yes, it's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. And once again, that's just for Americans. If you're international, maybe a completely different set of standards.
Do you have like a source, like a book source about toxicity and art materials and that you
Not just on art materials. I mean, we have some references that we use as I turn around and look at the bookshelf.
Come back. Well, the reason why I ask is because in the 90s, there was this amazing woman named Monona Rossell, and she wrote a book about safety and art. And when I was just out of grad school, like probably 98, I was adjuncting at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And she gave a lecture, and they would hire her to give this lecture. And it was just fascinating. Like, I mean, and I don't know what is still an issue to these days, but like Crayola markers, you walked out of there petrified of Crayola markers, like even though they say they're non-toxic. And then, just hearing about how working in a wood shop is far more dangerous than working in a clay studio.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But it was real. I thought it was fantastic for students to like start the year out petrified, but to learn about what to make good choices about what materials they're using. But I don't know what a great source is today, but it would be great if anybody out there has some recommendations.
Yeah, there's not a ton that we know of. We've done all this from sort of getting out there and doing the legwork and looking into the ASTM and the FDA standards and stuff like that. But I'm not aware of a contemporary thing. I will say your point about different materials being dangerous is so true. I know everyone gets really paranoid in ceramics because we're dealing with chemicals, right? The big, nasty chemical term. It really is not mostly as bad as you think it is. Firings aren't as scary as you think they are. The materials that we're dealing with are not as threatening as you think they are. You said a wood shop. Oh my goodness. You want to talk about scary. I did a bunch of wood shop training when I was in art school, and literal horror stories, things that would seem disgusting in a horror movie and unreal is what happens.
Oh, are you talking about like using equipment?
Yeah.
I was just talking about the sawdust because of all the preservatives, and additives that are, yeah.
Yep,
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah.
No, let's
doubt
not
about
talk
it.
about shop stories. That's
Yes,
we're gonna lose our listeners. Let's be kind to our listeners. Anyway, okay, so let's see what we can do here with this fantastic list of questions. We are going to start out with Joe and Sarah called in from New York City and have a question about cone firing temperatures.
Hi, Matt, Rose, and Kathy. This is Joe.
And Sarah.
Calling from New York City, and we had a question about bisque firing.
So I've been over time lowering the temperature I fire my bisque at, mostly to save time. I've heard someone mention that they bisque at 015, so I tried 08, which isn't that much lower than 06, and then now I regularly fire my bisque at 012. I know that means that the clay is more porous, but I haven't noticed any issues in my work, and my work is kind of elaborately glazed.
So our question is, why is the bisque firing standard in studios, at least in the US, commonly 04, 05, and 06? Wouldn't there be an incentive to bisque fire as low as possible from both a time and energy perspective? Thank you. We love listening to your podcast while we work.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Aw, adorable.
Okay, first of all,
They
I need
are
Joe and Sarah to
adorable.
be our new best friends. You guys are so
Yeah.
cute.
We can have them on sometime. Well, just to start out, I mean, the temperature difference between 04, 05, and 06 is not much. I mean, I was kind of surprised to hear 012, but I'll hand it over to you.
I'm gonna rock your world, Kathy.
Oh,
we often talk about doing this as a video podcast. It would be pretty boring. It's just all of us in our work clothes. But what just happened when we listened to that question is Kathy made a face like, oh, and I was like, preach, brother. Let's testify. Yeah, they are 100% right. Everything is better about lower bisquing. I am an evangelist for a low bisque. I think it is one of the best things that you can do in ceramics. Everything that everyone has been taught about bisquing higher is wrong.
Really?
Dead wrong, nonsense, gobbledygook.
No.
Yep, everything. You're not getting a cleaner bisque. You're not getting a better durability. It's all garbage. It's all, oh, I don't get pinholing when no, you don't. That is circumstantial evidence. It is all garbage. Total ceramics.
All right.
rumor.
Well, I need to hear more, though. Convince me.
Here's the thing. We need to go and talk about glaze application, because even Joe and Sarah said the one thing that is different with bisquing lower. You get a higher absorption rate in your clay body when you bisque to a lower temperature. That part is true, but it's also something that we need to be aware of what that means. So our glaze application, doesn't matter if you're dipping or brushing or whatever, is based on the absorption rate of your clay body, which is literally how much water that clay absorbs, okay? As you bisque higher, your absorption rate goes down, okay? Because you are now starting the firing process, starting the vitrification process, and that is going to change the absorption rate of your clay body. Now, having a lower absorption rate is not a problem per se. That is okay. The problem is with the conventional wisdom of bisquing to cone 04. We have profiled over 100 different commercial clays. And the problem is when we do these firing profiles, we fire the clay at an increasing series of temperatures. In basically every single clay that's out there, when you fire over cone 08, your absorption rate is going to go down from its maximum absorption rate. Basically, from 012 to 08, you have hit your maximum absorption rate. And it's always the same between 012 and 08. And after 08, it will start to go down. Now, the problem with that is bisque kilns are incredibly inconsistent. They are uneven as far as temperature, top to bottom, front to back. And the firings can also be a little bit shifty, get a little bit hot, a little bit cold. Well, what that means is that if you are firing past your maximum absorption rate, the absorption rate of your bisqueware is going to change in every single firing, or even in the same kiln, which means you're going to get a different application from your pots that are on the bottom of your kiln in that bisque than your pots that were at the top of your kiln, because you get different heat from top to bottom at bisque temperatures. Whereas if you bisque colder, because you're already at the maximum absorption rate, you're going to get exactly the same absorption, which means you're going to get exactly the same application every single time. Cone 04 bisque is one of the things that everyone is missing that is causing a ton of problems. You know, you have that glaze that doesn't look like it's coming out right. That's because a lot of glazes, their performance, their effects, whether it crystallizes or it phase separates or any of that, is based on the thickness of the application. Well, if the thickness of the application is dependent on the absorption rate, and you allow your absorption rate to float because of the variation in your bisque, you're going to get different glaze application, and you'll never know why, because you're like, I bisqued it all to the same temperature, or, you know, I had two different bisque firings, they're both to 04. Isn't that the same? And the answer is no, because the clay body is already going through its chemical process at that temperature, and so you're going to get a different application. We have tested this hundreds of times with thousands of students. It always is exactly the same thing. That high bisque rate is selling you short, and the benefits that you're told are not the benefits that are there. Okay. I already see the skeptical look from Kathy, so I'll shut up before I go to the next one.
No. I'm just thinking about, like, well, how did this become industry standard? Like, when you have a commercial glaze and like apply this to a 04 bisque, you know, or where did that come from?
I have a theory.
Oh, good.
I don't have any evidence of this. So I always like to say that, you know, we try to do everything that we do on evidence. I do not have evidence, but I have a theory as to why this is. And it goes back to commercial glazes. Most commercial glazes are brushing glazes. Okay. Yeah, you can buy a dipping glaze, whatever, but they're meant for brushing. When you're brushing, you are trying to reduce absorption. Because anyone who's ever taken a dipping glaze and tried to brush it, what happens? The second that brush hits the pot, it just dries. and you can't smooth it out. You can't make it even. Okay. So what do they do in brushing glazes? They add a material called CMC, carboxymethylcellulose, to those glazes, and that makes them quote unquote brushable. It's not making them brushable. It's making it so that the bisqueware doesn't absorb the water. So you can keep brushing and smoothing and brushing and smoothing because the bisqueware is not drawing the water in, because the CMC literally holds the water in the glaze. So why would commercial glazes recommend a higher bisque? Because that also reduces the absorption of the glaze application, so it's easier to brush. So for them, it makes sense, right? You want to reduce the absorption rate so that the glaze becomes more brushable, because the clay body is going to benefit for it. But if you are doing a dip application or a spray or whatever else, it's shooting you in the foot, because you need that absorption rate to control the quality of your glaze application. So that's part number one. Okay. So cone 08, in these hundreds of clay bodies we've tested, cone 08 is always the right temperature. So that's 942C. You're saying that, oh, there's not that much a difference between 04 and 06, but that is where that curve exists, right? Is right in that sweet spot. You go from maximum absorption to the absorption rate changing. And Joe and Sarah were saying, they were bisquing lower. So we've also looked at the next question, which people are told about high bisque temperatures, which is, oh, you're going to burn out more stuff. Yeah, no, you're not. Okay. We've tracked this in all of our commercial clays. There's a condition called LOI, which is loss on ignition, which is how much material something loses when you fire it. And it's a really simple test to do. You weigh your sample before it goes into the kiln, and you weigh it after it goes into the kiln. And anything that is coming off of the clay will be lost as weight. And it doesn't matter what it is. It literally, it goes off and becomes a gas and disappears. All that weight loss, 90% of it happens before cone 020. Basically 100% of the weight loss, we'll say 99% of the weight loss, occurs by cone 012. Okay. And after that, LOI numbers are flat. There is no change in LOI. And you know what's something really crazy? If you take a sample at your bisque temperature and you weigh that sample, and then don't glaze it, just put it into your glaze firing at full temperature, right? And you weigh it again, it'll weigh exactly the same. Because it's not losing any more material between the bisque and the firing. It's just becoming more dense. And so the weight's the same, the size has changed. So we're changing density, but not mass. Okay. So then, how low can you bisque? I have friends that have lived in Jingdezhen, China, and they tell me everybody in Jingdezhen bisque to cone 012, and they don't have any problems and everything works great. And I completely believe them. Okay. Because you're not burning anything more out. Now, Joe and Sarah were saying cone 015. I would say that's a little low.
No, they said 012.
012, yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. They said 012.
At 012, that's okay. I like cone 08 because I do want to push it as high as possible. Does the bisqueware get slightly tougher as the temperature goes up? Yes, but those numbers are really minor, really, really minor variations. But I'll always bisque as hot as possible. That said, their other consideration was environmental, and that is another part that is true. If you fire to a lower temperature, you theoretically use less energy. There is one big caveat, though, and that is how long does it take you to fire? We have looked at energy usage in different firings, and everybody's like, oh, cone 6 saves more energy and cone 10 uses exponentially more energy. That is also untrue. I have cone 10 firings that can use literally less energy than a cone 6 firing, because the cone 6 firing is slow, and all that time the kiln is on, it's using electricity. And the cone 10 firing is fast, and it's just literally on for less time. So you literally use less energy to fire from cone 10 to cone 6. And the same thing applies to your bisque. The longer that kiln is on, you are inherently using more energy. So if you fire lower so that you're firing for less time, or you use a faster ramp rate, you will use less energy. And so, yeah, they're not wrong.
Whoa. Okay. So as an example, let's say in my studio where we bisque to 06, And then all this bisqueware comes out and gets pretty much stacked on top of each other on the clash bisque shelves. So, and then we're going to glaze it with, all our glazes. So if I, this semester said, okay, we're only going to bisque to 012, is anything bad going to happen?
No.
It's not going to like chip and being stacked. Well, then
Nope.
Why doesn't everybody do this? Is no one listening to you?
Well, Rose, is Rose listening? Rose,
wow.
Rose, where'd you go? Rose, where'd you go?
Yeah. I'm here.
Now, no, there is one change under that concept. Their applications, you're going to have to start to look at their application because their absorption rates are going to go up. So a 3-second dip at that cone 012 bisque,
yeah,
you might need to add more water to your glaze. You don't need to change anything, but most likely your glaze needs more water because that 3-second dip they're normally doing is going to be thicker than it was before. But if you add in more water, it's just going to draw more water into the bisqueware, which will reduce the amount of glaze that goes with it. So that's a systemic change that you have to do. As far as, but is it going to change anything? Nope. It'll all come out exactly the same. There's no difference. Yep.
All right.
And I'm talking about dark clays and white clays and all that.
Really?
And it goes back. Why don't people change? I think, I love you ceramics community, but boy, are people addicted to myth and rumor. And, we always talk about the wise old potter. I do it this way because the wise old potter told me to do it that way. And boy, that's a great way to just allow terrible advice to permeate through the generations. I think a lot of people start with commercial glazes, and it's not wrong advice from a commercial glaze perspective, but it's not right advice when you're trying to have a mature studio practice where you're making your own glazes and you're in charge of it.
Well, and talking about consistency too.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to be consistent when you're making your own glaze and you're running your own studio. Consistency is your friend.
100%.
Right. Yeah. I don't, this might be something I'll try I'll try it as a experiment. I mean, we're already trying to recalculate everything for Mahavir instead of Custer Feldspar. The staff can only take so much. So we're
changing everything.
I know, right? We're just going to change everything. That's what summer's for.
We're a weaving studio now.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, Joe and Sarah, thank you for that one. That was fascinating. Okay. So let's go to our next question, where Dorothy or Dorothea, perhaps, from Croatia, called in about dishware.
Hello, for Flux Sake. This is Dorothea from Zagreb, Croatia. We have some beautiful plates that we inherited, and they date back to the end of 19th century and the beginning of 20th century. I'm wondering if those are safe to use, and is it possible that there is lead in those transparent glazes? We use them a few times a year. How can I know if there is lead in a transparent old glaze?
Well, she pronounces her name so beautifully, I massacred that. So I'm sorry. Apologies going out to Croatia.
And I love our international audience. So cool.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. It's so exciting whenever you see the different countries. It's fabulous.
Good news, bad news. There is a very high chance that dinnerware contains lead.
Yes.
There are lead swipe tests that you can get. It's just, it's sort of a wipe that you get. It'll change colors, or you can send it out to a lab. So yes, there's a very high chance that the work contains lead.
But those tests, so those wipe tests, though, are based on it leaching, though.
Correct.
So if those glazes are leaching lead, it'll change color.
Correct.
But it could be a lead composition and not be leaching and show that there is no lead.
Mm-hmm. That is true, but that's also a good sign that it's not particularly of a concern, which is what my thinking is.
Mm-hmm.
Funny story, everybody. There's a good chance most of the people listening to this have eaten off of leaded glazes in the last month.
Yep.
A very high chance. If you ate at a restaurant, the odds of that dinnerware having a lead glaze are very high. Because to be clear, although, this is generally an art audience and people who are making their own glazes, and lead, especially in the States and in much of Europe, has essentially been removed from the studio. Even Rose and I, who have been in ceramics for almost 30 years, I've made one lead glaze one time.
I've never used lead. Never.
And it's just been excised. We don't need it. But historically, it was used in everything. And industrially, it still is used a lot because it's a great material for glazes. It makes glazes that melt very, very well. My mentor, Dr. Carty, used to say that lead is the closest thing to magic in ceramics.
Mm-hmm.
It just has the best surfaces. It's just glossier than any gloss. It's wonderful. And it is still used quite a lot to this day. And the regulations as far as lead have nothing to do with not using lead. It has to do with what Rose is talking about, leaching of lead. And we can make glazes that are very, very stable and that you don't have to worry about. And a lot of restaurant ware to this day still uses lead in their glazes because it works really well. Should Dorothea be concerned with lead on her china that she's using a couple of times a year? No, it does not concern me all that much. There's a long conversation, and I would recommend going back a couple of years back in the podcast feed, listen to our interview with our friend Sarah, the toxicologist, but she talks about the difference between chronic exposure versus acute exposure, which is one-time exposure versus constant use. And in the question, she said she uses it a couple of times a year on a family event. That would be acute exposure at best. And honestly, how many minutes does the food spend in contact with the dinner? You serve it, it's on the plate for 20 minutes before it gets eaten. That type of exposure, even on a glaze that's not great, is going to be minimal. Now, when we talk about lead, and this isn't a story that may be apocryphal, but what I was always told about lead, and specifically to the story about Fiestaware. Fiestaware is still the biggest dinnerware company in America. They have these big, bright glazes. And Fiestaware went off the market for a number of years because Fiestaware was so popular. What happened is that people started making knockoffs out of the country of Fiestaware. And these were all made with leaded glazes. Well, funny story, Fiestaware was never using leaded glazes to begin with. They never used them. But because the knockoffs were using lead and they were coming into the country and failing lead tests, that Fiestaware got a bad name and that they had to close down that production for a number of years because they were just shamed, even though they had nothing to do with it. And the one story I was told, and again, this may be apocryphal, is that the real issue is, people would go out of the country, they'd buy a Fiestaware pitcher. And this is back in the 50s and in the 40s when you would buy orange juice and we didn't have a disposable container. So you got your orange juice from the milkman or in a glass bottle that you had to return. So what did you do? You took the orange juice, you poured it into your own pitcher and put it in the fridge. Well, people would put their orange juice in their Fiestaware pitcher, and then it would sit there and soak for days and days and days. And the acidity of the orange juice would soak the lead out of the glaze, and then the kids would be drinking it. And so that's where there was lead toxicity. Well, that is chronic exposure also from a terrible glaze. Right. And so that becomes that sort of trailing thing. But again, never had anything to do with Fiestaware. Was all cheap knockoff imported ware. But that is the type of chronic exposure. So don't put orange juice in something you may be concerned with and leave it sitting. But if it's just a dinnerware set that you're using at the holidays or every now and then, could it be bad? Yes. Can you have it tested? Yes. Does it particularly concern me? Not particularly. Lead threats are really from paint and dust and things like that, or from an inappropriate use, like I said, like storing orange juice.
I remember when I was young, like when you would be on your way to the cashier near the gum and candy, there would be lead tests for your to take home. And then I think when I first started in clay, I was taught to put a lemon slice on a piece to test. I don't know if it was lemon fresh. I can't remember what I was testing.
I won't go off on it this time. Someone else can ask this question. We'll put it into a future podcast. But I actually hate the lemon test with the passion of 1,000 red hot suns. The lemon test is a garbage test. The lemon test only tells you that the worst glazes are terrible. It doesn't tell you if questionable glazes are questionable.
Well, it tells you terrible is terrible.
Yeah. You can't see chemical leaching. Like, you can have a glaze that leaches. It won't degrade. It doesn't mean you're going to see the lemon on it. So I know the lemon test makes people feel better about them putting pots into the world. You can just stop with the lemon test. It literally is telling you nothing. It's a waste of a good lemon. You could be making cocktails with that, people. God, I need a gin and tonic now.
Me too. After the whole bisqueing conversation, I need a martini. So on that note, people, this podcast crew needs to head to the bar.
It's happy hour, everybody.
So until we see each other next time, Matt and Rose.
Bye, Kathy.
See you, Kathy.
Well, folks, that's it for this week's episode of For Flux Sake. I'd like to thank the listeners who submitted questions this week. And if you want your question answered on the show, shoot us an email at ForFluxSakePodcast@gmail.com. So join us next time. And when in your studio, remember what Rose always says.
Always remember to test, test, test. This is a test of the emergency glaze system. Beep.
This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.